$8.5 billion planned takeover of Capri Holdings. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
Yeah, okay.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa Mateo. Really appreciate it. So here I am, and here Paul is.
Yep.
He's here too. I forget. Yeah. Sorry, you're that guy. We are at Bloomberg NEF Summit Day 2. So Paul, one of my bigger takeaways from yesterday when we were here is that you have a lot of money being spent on stuff.
Yep.
And that's the good part. The other part is there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of, are we spending it on the right stuff?
Yep.
Is the demand really there? Permitting is an issue, connection delays, trade issues. There's lots of stuff that we're trying to unpack here. One way to look at it is the importance of big energy in this space. So you need Exxon, Chevron, Shell, Total, BP. You need these guys to put money in the right spot to really help turn things around. So one of those individuals we're going to talk to right now is Jeff Gustafson. Nope. Gustafson. I can't do it. I asked him.
That's all right.
Gustafson. It's the V and the S,
cool.
Jeff. This is my
You
problem.
got it.
He's president of Chevron New Energies. He's been at Chevron for, what was it, 25 years, you said?
25 years is
You've held lots of different positions. What brought you to the new energy part of Chevron? What's that like for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, great to be here. Thanks for having me. We launched these new businesses about 3 years ago. This is actually our third full year, and it's a suite of businesses that support our lower carbon strategy as a company. There's two pieces to that. One is lowering the carbon intensity of our traditional oil and gas business. The other part is growing new low carbon businesses and solutions to scale, and that's what Chevron New Energies is. We're focused on renewable fuels, carbon capture, utilization and storage, hydrogen, carbon offsets, emerging technologies, and everything in between. This is something that's always been a passion of mine, the energy transition and low carbon energy. I love oil and gas. I grew up in oil and gas, but now shifting, seeing a company like Chevron with the capabilities we bring to this space, growing these new businesses, I couldn't be more excited about this role.
And I always look to the educational background of our guest because I think that's kind of fun. University of Colorado, he's a Buffalo.
Oh, boy.
That's big. And he's also got his MBA from the Red McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas. Red McCombs is a co-founder of Clear Channel, a little radio company I took public back in the day. So I know Red pretty well. And Larry Mays likes to say, hey, I got my name on the MBA program at Texas A&M for $10 million. Red, you spent $50 million. I got a better deal.
You got a better deal.
Yeah. Jeff, I don't know, if we fast forward 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how do you guys think about sustainable energy as a part of the overall portfolio of Chevron? What percentage do you think that might look like?
Yeah, good question. And when we launched, we announced that we were allocating or guiding to spending $10 billion over an 8-year period. Right? This would be 2021 to 2028. And that's just the starting point. So these are already a significant part of our capital allocation strategy. We have a very large oil and gas business, which requires a lot of capital to maintain and grow that business to meet global demand. But these businesses, we're spending anywhere from $1.5 to $2 billion a year to support these new businesses. And my job and our job as a new segment is to find the right opportunities that are investable so we can grow this business even further.
So Paul asked this question in break, and I actually think it's a good one, so I'm going to ask it. You're based in Houston, and his question was, are guys like you, the new energy people, are you guys welcome in Houston?
Like the oil bar, like the oilman's bar, like that I would go to.
He's basically thinking like the cowboy guys who stick like a pipe in the ground and get oil. He's thinking those people. Are you welcome in those bars?
Yes. And I love being referred to as a new energy person. No, I mean, this is, I think this, look, there's three things that we really need to see in order to accelerate the growth of these businesses, and that's greater collaboration between private companies and policymakers, between governments around the world. It's lowering the cost of these new technologies and solutions, so customers, large businesses, or individual customers will buy them, and it is bringing capabilities to bear, the right capabilities. And that goes to your Houston question. The energy industry possesses a lot of the capabilities, technical, operating, commercial capabilities that are required to grow these businesses profitably to scale. So absolutely, a lot of activity in Houston, a lot of companies engaged in this. So Houston it's an oil and gas capital. That's how it's thought of. It's also a new energy capital.
So where are we in terms of, I've been reading a lot on this. Alex, she knows that she's the expert. I've been reading up a lot on this over the last several days. It seems like the U.S. government's putting a lot of money into this. That's the good news, as Alex mentioned earlier. But I've also heard here over the last couple of days, it's still not easy doing business with the government. I'm thinking permitting for certain projects and things like that. What's been your experience there as to, is the government doing the best it can to kind of facilitate some of these investments in transition?
Yeah, so collaboration between the private sector and the public sector is fundamental here. It helps lower the cost. Those are, advocacy, understanding politics, not just in this country, but around the world, is a strength of our company, of energy companies, more broadly. So it fits one of our existing capabilities. But that is one of the starting points here. You need the right policy support, the right incentives to get the private sector investing even more heavily in this space. That will drive the technology forward, that will drive innovation, that will drive to building large-scale projects, which will lower the cost, make it more consumable for the world. And that is a cycle that will then continue. So it starts with policy, but it really is sustained by the investment by the private sector in technology. Government's a very important partner. We've seen, we're having really constructive conversations with the government, but you mentioned permitting. There's still a long way to go to make all of this come together. We've shown some progress, but there are many steps in front of us.
Paul, though, to your point, it seems like the good part of this is that energy companies in the new energy world are in the room talking to people.
Yep.
Typically, the government and oil and gas have a contentious relationship at best in certain administrations, and it feels like in this area, maybe that is dissolving a bit, which would be helpful. Something that I've noticed, too, is that I think it was like $303 billion has been spent, I think it was last year, on all these new energy stuff. What I'm also hearing is that demand is a forgotten problem. Like all the money is being spent, but the money being spent on supplying the stuff and getting that cost down, but not enough is being spent on demand to incentivize a company signing up with you for ESAF or something along those lines. Is that true?
There is a lot of money being spent in these new businesses. It's actually $1.7 trillion globally, compared to about $1 trillion spent in the traditional energy business last year. And we need even more to grow these businesses to scale. And you hit on a very important point. It is, and I'll use hydrogen as an example. It's not hard to produce hydrogen. It's harder to produce low-carbon hydrogen at a low cost, something that we're working on using natural gas as a feedstock or using electricity and renewable power as feedstocks to produce low-carbon hydrogen. But transporting hydrogen to the market, you need policy support in order to do that. You need technological innovation to do that, to lower the cost. And then importantly, encouraging consumers to buy hydrogen, making it easier for them to transition from a traditional product that they're using today to a lower carbon product that comes at a higher cost. That's where demand incentives and policy support will also be required.
What's the biggest headwind you guys have been facing over the last 3 years as you begin this transition? Has it been on the regulatory governmental front? Has it been getting capital from your CFO? Where's it been?
No, there's always a lot of challenges when you're starting up new businesses. But it's very, very exciting, and we're making tremendous, progress. We've identified probably a dozen large foundational projects in all of these sectors around not just the U.S. but around the world. We're the second largest bio-based diesel producer in the United States. We've got a large, CCUS hub on the U.S. Gulf Coast. We've got a large hydrogen project in Utah that we're growing. So we're making a lot of progress. There's always challenges along the way. How do you prioritize the best opportunities? How do you advocate for the right policies? How do you create the right culture to support these businesses? We have a fantastic culture in our company. We're using all of that and more, but you have to think about these businesses in a different way. So there are challenges, but it has been very rewarding at the same time.
He's not going to answer that question, Paul.
Well, we'll see. I'm looking at the stock here.
I thought I did answer it.
We're looking for hey, what's really hard? What stresses you out?
Well, it's all hard.
Yeah.
And so all of that, how can we collaborate, more aggressively? How can we lower the cost faster?
Yeah.
How can we bring all of the capabilities we have to bear here? How do we make sure that everyone remains committed to this? Not just us, but everyone in this ecosystem to drive these businesses forward. So those are all big challenges. I'm not discounting that,
Jeff.
but I'm very excited about what we're doing.
Gotta leave it there, Jeff. Really appreciate it. Jeff Gustafson, I'm gonna get it. President of Chevron New Energies. I'm gonna work towards that for sure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, right now let's head to New York City, world and national news with Mr. John Tucker.
Hi, Paul and Alex. Lebanon's Hezbollah launched drones and guided missiles at an army site in Israel's Galilee. It was an attack today that wounded at least 6 people. Comes amid mounting tensions in the region. Hezbollah said it hit an Israeli reconnaissance site. The assault, which Hezbollah said was a response to Israel killing a number of its fighters, comes as the Jewish state weighs a response to Iran's missile and drone strikes on Saturday night. President Biden calling for higher tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum. Bloomberg's Steve Potus says this is part of a series of steps to shore up the American steel sector and win over workers in this election year.
In a visit to Pittsburgh today, Mr. Biden will propose new 25% tariffs on certain Chinese steel and aluminum products as part of an ongoing review, while the U.S. also launches a formal probe into China's shipbuilding industry. The steps target a relatively small segment of the U.S. market, with imports of Chinese steel and aluminum totaling roughly $1.7 billion in 2023. But U.S. officials said the announcements were designed to head off an expected surge and safeguard the U.S. market. The president will also reiterate that United States steel based in Pittsburgh should remain American-owned. In Washington, Steve Potus, Bloomberg Radio.
And with 100 days to go until the Paris Olympics, it's still not clear whether any athletes from Russia will actually go. The question is whether Moscow will accept the conditions that the International Olympic Committee set for Russia in the wake of its invasion of Ukraine. The IOC will let them compete as neutral athletes, meaning they can't use their country's flag or anthem or take part in team sports such as soccer and basketball. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got red and green on the screen. The Nasdaq down 0.1%, but we have the Dow and the S&P 500. Right now, it's little change. The 2-year yield at 4.95%, down 3 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.63%, down 4 basis points. To commodities we go. We'll start with COMEX gold. It's higher at $2,408 an ounce, and spot gold $2,392 an ounce. Over to oil, we have Brent crude at $89 a barrel, WTI crude at $84 a barrel. Some layoff news from Morgan Stanley. Bloomberg's learned the company plans to start cutting about 50 investment banking jobs in the Asia-Pacific region this week, with most of it in Hong Kong and China. Right now, checking in with Morgan Stanley shares, they're up more than 1.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you very much. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. We are at Bloomberg NEF Summit Day 2. We're in the middle of the Hubble. We're in our Intercontinental Hotel on 48th Street down in Midtown Manhattan. And it's all about getting world leaders and CEOs and thought leaders and analysts together to sort of tackle this energy transition, where we are now, and then where do we go to, and how do we do that? Well, joining us now is our next guest, Andy Vesey. He's president and CEO of Fortescue North America, and he joins us now. Andy, good to see you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
So I do follow this industry quite closely, and I was like, what? Fortescue is a metal company. What's going on? It's based in Australia. What are you doing here talking about hydrogen?
Well,
I missed something.
Fortescue was a metal company. In fact, it still is. It's the 4th largest producer of iron ore in the world and the lowest cost operator. But our founder, Andrew Forrest, came to the realization that carbon emissions was having a significant impact on the planet. It was happening quickly, and that his business contributed to that. And so he made a commitment that he was going to decarbonize his metals business, Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 2030. And in thinking about doing that, he had to think about all the technologies he needed to make that happen, and many of them weren't available commercially. So he decided that he was going to create that ecosystem. One component of that was green hydrogen, because he needed green hydrogen to do a number of things to replace diesel fuel in his mining operations. But then he realized there were a lot of other things he needed, and a lot of more things he needed. So what Fortescue is today, while it still has a metals group, it now has an energies group, but we describe ourselves as an integrated green technology, energy, and metals group. And they're all coming together, and it's one Fortescue now. So that's why we're here, and I happen to have the privilege of trying to be on the side of the business that produces green hydrogen, specifically in North America.
What is green hydrogen?
Okay, well, it's hydrogen, but it's made from green energy, which would include solar, wind, and hydro.
So just to Alex explain to you here.
Please.
So you have something called an electrolyzer, where you get water in and you separate the hydrogen from the water, and how you power that determines the color of that hydrogen. So if you power it with, say, coal, it's going to be gray. If you power it with natural gas, it's going to be blue. If you power it with solar and wind, it's going to be green. And that's
right.
I learned something again. But now I'm guessing there's a tax issue here. I'm reading all throughout your notes, 45V. Dumb it down for somebody like me, a media guy.
Yeah, so look, the bottom line is that 70% of a green molecule made what would be called electrolytic, because it uses electricity. 70% of the cost of that molecule is the cost of that green electron. And so if you're going to be in this business, you would say, well, I'm going to go every place where the renewable energy is really, really cheap, right? You're going to go to North Africa. You're going to be in Australia. You might be in parts of Latin America. But where you would not be would be in the U.S., right? Because we know it's expensive. But there's another thing about the U.S. It's probably one of the largest consumers of gray hydrogen, or hydrogen that's produced from methane gas. So there's a huge market here. But the challenge is getting to a price point where people will buy it. Well, the U.S. government also understood this, and understood that to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors, meaning sectors that can't use a green electron to meet emission reduction goals, need a green molecule. And so the Biden administration decided, well, what we need to do is assist in getting the price down. get the industry started, and then eventually through scale and involvement in the market, the price will come down naturally on the learning curve, right? So they came up with the idea of providing a tax incentive, right? A PTC that you can get direct cash for it. So it would help lower the end product price to customers. And the maximum you can get would be $3 a kilogram, and that's based on the carbon intensity of that molecule. So all non-gray molecules, right? All those molecules not produced or that don't have carbon emissions at some level would get a rising incentive. Okay, brilliant, right? Now companies like Fortescue, who is investing all over the world, decides we're going to put capital in the United States, right? We're going to develop technology in the United States because this could be a big market, right? But there was an expectation of how that would come out. And when the rules were written, it's now called 45E because it's a section in the IRS code, came out in such a way that it didn't actually help us. To some degree, it hurt early movers because of how strict the rules were.
Meaning that, from the way I understand it, is that normally you could say, look, I'm going to buy this much wind and solar over the course of a year. Give me the credit. But they want hour for hour matching. So if you use energy for an hour, that needs to be solar, and that needs to be counted, and that's very difficult because that's not predictable with wind and solar, and you also don't have it.
Right. See, you understand this perfectly.
Well,
that's
I win.
Yes.
That's
I don't know when I win, but I win.
One of the pillars, right?
Okay.
But probably the most problematic. And I'll give you a reason why. So you said it earlier. We use an electrolyzer, right? We take electricity and we split the water into oxygen and hydrogen. That's what we do. On terms of when you're going to be using the energy, that's called temporal matching. And it exists because there are no 100% green grids in the U.S. So there's always the concern by adding additional load, you potentially are going to use fossil-based energy to meet it, right? So the view is, how are you going to do the temporal matching, right? So if I have a 1 megawatt electrolyzer, I need to have 3 times that much capacity in the market if I'm matching on an annual basis, because I get to average it over the year, and over a year, perfect, right? If you go to monthly matching, you need 5 times as much energy, but an hourly, you need 7 times, right? So if I'm building a gigawatt of electrolyzers in Texas, I may only need a gigawatt of energy at any time, but I have to buy 7 times that to ensure that I have all the probabilities working so I know I can match in that hour, which means that the bulk of what I buy, I don't need. So I'm going to have to be buying and selling energy, and that's equivalent to almost, between 5 and 10% of the annual, the daily load in the ERCOT system. It's massive. So what are the implications? Well, there are 2. The way 45V is structured today, it will absolutely increase the price of the product. Now remember, the whole idea of this was to decrease the price of the product. It will increase the price of the project anywhere between 150 to 175% to the consumer, okay? The second thing is, because of the massive amount of energy we have to buy, all right, we have to make the project smaller so you can actually transact that. The third point, because of, again, hourly matching, there are only certain places you can do it, so there are fewer opportunities to get it done, right? And if we have to do one other thing, which is part of the 45E, we have to add new green electrons. Well, that can take years and years. So we are doing everything against the original intent, right? And why are we doing this? Because we're thinking about the perfect solution at the beginning, right? We want the perfect projects. The idea should be, no, we're building an industry which ultimately will work. Let's not handicap it at the beginning, because like any other industry, the more market interactions you have, the more things you build, the more things that fail, the more supply chains that get created, the more people who get trained. That's what building an industry is. And unfortunately, we're thinking about projects. Right? One-off projects, and that's just wrong.
All right, Andy, we really appreciate it. It's complex.
There's a lot
it really
of chemistry
helps
in
us
this
break it down.
energy thing.
There's a lot of chemistry.
I didn't know
was
that.
actually weirdly good at chemistry, but it's all forgotten, of course. Andy VZ, President and CEO of Fortescue Industries here in North America. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I guess the takeaway, and we haven't even dealt with the demand side. Then you have to make the demand be there. People are going to have to buy that product, and that gets really, and that's also very difficult.
And Alex, if I can say one last word on this,
because we're going to go to break.
Okay.
Next
Cheers.
time.
S&P 500 up
Bye-bye.
0.1%. The Dow pretty much unchanged. The Nasdaq absolutely unchanged. Yields a little bit lower. 10-year 4.62%. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Shares of Alcoa are higher. They're up nearly 3%. Bloomberg reporting President Biden will call for 25% tariffs on certain Chinese steel and aluminum products when he speaks to steel workers in Pittsburgh today. Bloomberg's Rebecca Chung Wilkins has more from Hong Kong.
As we get closer to the election, increasingly areas of Chinese trade in China are going to be deeply politicized. And it does not look like that momentum is kind of pulled back in any way. And that more and more areas of trade will find itself, of Chinese trade, specifically imports into the US, will find itself the target of these types of curbs and tariffs.
U.S. Steel right now up 0.8%. We have Cleveland Cliffs. They're up 2%. There's news that Tesla will have shareholders vote again on its $56 billion compensation package for Elon Musk after a Delaware court voided it. Now it's also asking for a vote on moving the company's state of incorporation to Texas from Delaware. Tesla shares down more than 1%. To earnings we go. United forecasts better than expected profit this quarter, easing those concerns that Boeing aircraft delays will put pressure on their expansion plans. Meanwhile, Boeing's safety record, well, that will be under pressure today. Senators are hearing from a whistleblower's claims of shortcomings in its safety culture. More from Bloomberg's government's Jonathan Tamari.
Boeing executives have said that there's no basis for this or that it's not correct. Interestingly enough, the executives will not be at these hearings, so it's going to be just the whistleblowers at the moment, but we are expecting those Boeing executives to appear before Congress later this year.
And Boeing down 1%. Back to earnings, LVMH sales growth slowed at the start of the year. Wealthy customers pulled back on spending. Its ADRs right now, they're down nearly 1%. And Adidas have raised its profit target for the year thanks to strong demand from its classic sneakers. That is your company news at this hour. I'm Lisa Mateo.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, happy, what day is it? Wednesday. Happy
Wednesday.
Hump Day,
Yeah,
guys.
absolutely.
Happy Wednesday. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. We are live from Intercontinental Hotel right here in Midtown Manhattan at Bloomberg NEF Summit Day 2, where we bring together all the thought leaders and CEOs and analysts around the world of how we get the energy world to transition. We also bring you all of the news and world headlines with John Tucker. John, we miss you. Go ahead.
Hey, Alex and Paul. Well, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates calling for maximum self-restraint in the Middle East to spare the region from the dangers of war and its dire consequences. That comes in an unusually frank joint statement today. Stuart Livingston Wallace is Bloomberg's head of Middle East coverage.
In terms of the UAE and Saudi Arabia, again, two big power players in the region, both incredibly keen for this not to escalate. Both of them are trying to transform their economies. Both of them have this very long-term view about switching away from a fossil fuel-based economy into something a little bit more diverse. They can't do that in a situation where it's this almost perpetual warfare that's going on overhead.
A flurry of diplomacy continues to try to keep Iran's weekend attack on Israel from spiraling into a wider Middle East conflict. And the near-complete defeat of Iran's drone and missile barrage against Israel Saturday marked a success for air defense systems, but it was also a sobering reminder that weapons capable of intercepting these sorts of attacks are in short supply. The Journal reports a global scramble for missiles has meant it now takes up to 2 years or more to deliver some air defense interceptors. And two senators, one Republican, one Democrat, proposing a measure to regulate stable coins. It comes amid a push in the House and Senate to pass such legislation as soon as next month. Cynthia Loomis, the Wyoming Republican, and Kirsten Gillibrand of New York said today that their bill would protect consumers of the U.S. dollar while enabling innovation in payments. And New York City's congestion pricing plan will now include funds to help alleviate potential pollution issues in the tolling program that it may spark in New Jersey. The head of the transit network in the city, which is implementing the new tolling plan designed to alleviate traffic congestion in Manhattan, said today its latest submission to the Department of Transportation now includes money for New Jersey. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Alex and Paul.
All right, John, you might be far from us, but you sent us this great story to chat about right now. So we thank you for that. I did see it in the Journal.
Yeah, it's
Here's
how many
title, right?
coins do you either just throw away or like get dumped in the cushion in the couch?
No,
well, apparently it's a lot of money.
That thing where you take it to a bank and you dump the coins and you get money.
No, you take it now to the supermarket. They got those machines where you just dump it all in there, and it's awesome. I did that a while ago.
Yeah. And the reason why we say this, guys, is because the Journal, here's the piece, Americans throw away up to $68 million in coins a year.
I don't see, I'm a cash-based person, as people can tell. I like cash, but I don't do change. I haven't done change for many, many years. You know,
you could be throwing away $68 million.
Well, I threw it all like in my car, but then I did take it to that coin machine, and it was like $50.
No, it's something.
Yeah.
It's definitely, I think we got a couple hundred the last time we went. It was definitely not chump change. So you basically, this is a company called Reworld. It's a sustainable waste processing company, is on that treasure hunt that you throw away. And it says that in the 7 years since it started the effort, it has collected at least $10 million worth of coins.
Yep. Coins are as good as junk for many Americans. Buses, laundromats, toll booths, and parking meters now take credit cards and debit cards, and mobile payments using any form of physical currency has become more of an annoyance. But change is often more trouble than it's worth to carry around. The U.S. quarter had roughly the buying power in 1980 that a dollar has today.
Wow.
So it's like,
in 1980?
Yeah, back in the day. Good year for me.
That's definitely something.
If you lost a $100 bill, you'd look for it. If you lost a $20 bill, you'd look for it. If you lost a quarter,
you're not going to look for it. Well,
No.
apparently, maybe, we should do that. Apparently, here's my question. Where do you put it? So you have the coins. You need something to put it before you go take it to the bank,
Oh,
right?
a big jar,
Like,
yeah.
you need a jar that doesn't look yucky, and anyway.
Yep, it's a big thing. Who needs to change?
Thanks, Tucker, for the story. All right, much more coming up from BNEF Summit Day 2. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney. We are broadcasting live from the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Conference at the Intercontinental Hotel, East 48th Street, Midtown Manhattan. A lot of energy folks here. I'm brushing up on my chemistry. Apparently that's important in the energy industry. We're going to be talking to some more industry leaders here at the conference, talking about the transition for the energy industry to a more greener aspect of energy going forward. So we'll have some great guests coming up on that. We're also going to check in with Craig Trudell, Bloomberg Global Autos editor. Every day there's something new on Tesla. Now, I guess Mr. Musk wants to get paid that $56 billion payday again.
Billion?
Billion? I don't know. It's what it says here. Billion. I think he wants all that stock that he's owned. And his stock's down like 36% year to date, so it might not be the right time to ask the board. I don't know, but we'll break it all down. Right now, let's go to Mr. Charlie Pellet for Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. Paul, Tesla shares down again, by the way, now tumbling by 1.1%, bringing that year-to-date loss to 37.45%. We've got equities swinging between gains and losses. S&P back in the green after an earlier bounce. Right now, a little changed, up by 1 point, up less than 1/10%. The Dow higher by 2 points now, also up less than 1/10%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index is in the red, down 15 now, a drop there of 1/10%. Bottom line here, a relative sense of calm returning to global financial markets. Bonds rebounding after a sell-off driven by bets that the Fed will keep rates higher for longer. The 10-year 4.62%, with the 2-year 4.94%. Our Abigail Doolittle will have a whole lot more on the markets coming up in just a moment. Right now, we have got the price of gold up 0.4%. Gold at $23.92 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude, a retreat today, down 0.8%, $84.71 per barrel. Well, next up for Wall Street, 3 hours from now, the Fed's Beige Book, which collects anecdotal information about the U.S. economy from its 12 regional banks. Ira Jersey is chief U.S. rate strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence.
We'll be looking for any significant shifts. I suspect that it'll be a mixed bag, with some districts doing pretty well and having modest growth, and then others saying that there are, some cracks. There are some areas of the country where, the job market's not as strong, and then others where it is still pretty robust. So those nuances and the regional differences are always something interesting to look at in the Beige Book, but tends not to be very market moving, at least on the face of it.
And of course, the number hits at 2 p.m. Wall Street time. President Biden's administration intends to reimpose oil sanctions on Venezuela, ending a 6-month reprieve if Nicolas Maduro's regime does not take steps in the next 2 days to honor an agreement to allow a fairer vote in elections scheduled for July. U.S. oil stocks higher. Right now, we've got ExxonMobil up 0.2%. ADRs of BP, they are up 0.1%. Chevron up 0.7%. And this update is brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Really appreciate it. So the market, are we doing something interesting?
No,
we're not, are we?
Nothing, absolutely nothing. Unched on the day, we'll call it. I'm just going to call out Bitcoin, though, because Tom Keene's not here. It's off about 3% today. 61,100. That thing was just at like 73,000 a couple of weeks ago. So the volatility in the crypto biz is still a thing.
It is still a thing. Also, what's weird is that we're seeing some buying in the Treasury market. I have to wonder, if we hit that 5% in the 2-year, is that when you clip the coupon, and then we see demand kind of coming in? We get a 20-year coming later on today. So at 33 billion. Yeah. So we'll see how we do there and see what that takedown is. Abigail Doolittle is joining us in the Interactive Broker Studio. Abigail, we're kind of, like, what's going on today?
I think that there's a little bit more going on than both you and Paul are talking about, and I say that because of the intraday volatility at the highs. The S&P 500, the S&P 500 had been up more than 0.5% at one point not so long ago, down more than 0.1%. So that's 0.6% intraday volatility. This, of course, after a couple of bearish reversals in a row, and all of this on the month puts the S&P 500 heading at this point toward its worst months in September of 2023, down nearly 4%. But the Russell 2000, this is really pretty interesting to me. That small cap index is down 7.4% so far in the month of April, heading to its worst month since September 30th of 2022. That was, of course, the big sell-off year. And today we may have bonds rallying. We may have yields down just a little bit. But overall, this year and on the month and in recent days on this recalibration of Fed cut bets, how many times will they cut? If you recall, last December it was 6 or 7 times, and then it was 3 times, and now it's 2 times, and you have the election year. So it seems like bond investors, as we've talked about over the last few weeks, have been ahead of the possibility that the Fed might not be cutting as much as folks had thought. Stocks seem to be catching up to that possibility now.
Looking at the relative strength index, which you taught me all about, Abigail, for the S&P 500, we're down to 38 here. We're kind of getting down to maybe a little bit of technical support here. Do you feel it? Do you feel that out in the marketplace?
Not really. I'm looking, in my view, bear with me, I'm just pulling up. I need to take the look at the fresh RSI, but this is something we've been talking about for a long time because we've been talking about this bearish divergence. This has been growing on the S&P 500 since last year. Record highs made on the S&P 500 last year on an overbought RSI. Recent record highs, I should say recent, a couple weeks ago, made on a much lower RSI, telling you that those recent highs having to do with less bullish investors. So the RSI, to your point, is at a 39. Anything below a 20 would be oversold. Anything above a 70 is overbought. The thing that we want to see, though, similar to, if you have an RSI at 90, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That would point to the fact that you have a lot of bullish momentum. And so long as there's higher highs, it tells you that the investors are more bullish. The inverse is true for lower. So we could have this RSI go down to, 30 is the oversold, down to 30 or below. But so long as it's going lower on lower lows, that would suggest the momentum is going in that direction. Because of the S&P 500 being below its 50-day moving average and on downside momentum and some other technical factors, it does appear possible that we could see some continued consolidation similar to what we saw last August, September, and October.
So one of the worst performing stocks today is Tapestry. And potentially the FTC could be getting involved in a Tapestry Capri tie-up. Now, just to, I'll explain to Paul, Tapestry sells Coach, Kate Spade, Stuart Weitzman.
Okay, yep.
I would say middle luxury, but what do I know? I'm not a luxury analyst. And Capri is Michael Kors, Versace, and Jimmy Choo. Jimmy Choo and Versace being super high-end. Yeah, okay, he knows that part.
I know that part. I read the book.
Abigail, this is a really aggressive FTC right now. Why would they block this?
It's really super interesting, this story, because fashion is usually not something that falls under the look of antitrust law. But to your point, the FTC has been very aggressive recently under Lena Khan and really almost trying to create the law, very different than the DOJ. The reason that they would potentially block this deal is because apparently within paperwork, because even though we're hearing about this now, apparently attorneys and other folks involved have been talking about it for a week or two or even longer. There's paperwork between these two companies that suggests that within the outlet malls that they are each other's primary competitors from a price standpoint. So that apparently would be the FTC's foothold. The question, though, is the outlet mall area, is that a big enough segment of the overall retail area to create the antitrust concerns? Now, interesting, there is some chatter coming out of a recent conference of the American Bar Association suggesting that, yes, some attorneys think that the FTC's case could really have hold, but it's going to be an interesting one to watch, and certainly a lot of interesting philosophical pieces there.
All right, Abigail, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate getting the update there. Abigail Doolittle, she follows all of the markets for Bloomberg. I'm looking at Tesla. That stock has been in the news
every day.
Every day. This year, the stock is really underperforming, down 37%. So it seems like an odd time for Tesla. We'll ask shareholders to vote again on the same $56 billion compensation package for Chief Executive Officer Elon Musk that was voided by a Delaware court early this year. Craig Trudell joins us. He covers all that auto stuff for Bloomberg. It's just amazing here, Craig. It seems like an odd time to be asking for this monstrous payday here. What's going on at Tesla, the board, and Elon?
Yeah, it's not a huge shock in that we sort of heard the complaining about this ruling as soon as it hit. We saw it play out on X, as you would expect. But it is, I guess I was surprised to see that, their move here was to take the same plan and just put it back to the shareholders. It's a fairly simple one, but it does seem like a pretty bold one, just given the very thorough case that was laid out by the Delaware Chancery Court, against the company, and particularly the board. I mean, the language that Judge Kathleen McCormick used was pretty notable. She described the directors as, and I quote, supine servants of an overweening master. I mean, she just had a lot of real zingers about this board. And for them to, respond to that by, doing it over again is really something.
Just to be clear, we're talking 56 billion, like with a B?
with a B, yeah. I mean, I guess.
How do we get to that?
If you want to defend the board here, of course they did. We constantly referred to this pay package as a moonshot award, right? And it absolutely was. It was setting targets that nobody thought was at all possible, that the company wouldn't be able to pull off. It was based on performance of the company and its earnings and market value. And I think there was a combination of Musk absolutely pulling miracles in terms of the earnings performance of this company that no one saw coming. But it was also the case that, this company was the sort of poster boy for the ZERP era and, a meme stock, right? And we don't get there without, the enthusiasm that Musk managed to pull off, in addition to turning this company into a car company to really, take seriously.
All right, so they're also looking to reincorporate, I guess, in a friendlier jurisdiction, maybe get out of Delaware and get to the great state of Texas. Is that all tied together with this?
They interestingly do lay out in the proxy that they wanted to sort of put this to shareholders together. They didn't want to be perceived as basically running from Delaware in response to the ruling and going to Texas, where they would be treated differently. They wanted to have shareholders, get another opportunity to say yay or nay to this, and give them an opportunity to weigh in on whether they should change the incorporation. I think it still remains to be seen, just exactly how this can work out legally speaking. This idea that a court would make this ruling and the company would, basically just have shareholders perform a do-over after the judge, said that they, did not look out for the best interests of shareholders. I guess if you're Tesla, the argument you make here is that, well, you just exposed this idea that we apparently did enough and broke it down in pretty damning detail. The investors know now, the shareholders can vote again, and if they vote in favor, then what's your problem, essentially.
There too. I want to transition to Continental, which is an auto parts company, really. That stock is down over 5% over in Germany. And I say that because their results were worse than feared. And this all points to the current auto market isn't doing too great. And then the also EV market isn't doing too great. And for Continental, that squeeze is on both sides.
Yeah, I think they've been a company that really has struggled with this transition. Really, like very much been in a position of being caught flat-footed in terms of being ready for electrification, and has made a lot of moves to try and address that haven't gone particularly smoothly. And so, in addition to this idea that the auto market is showing some signs of strain under the pressure of higher interest rates, making it more difficult for consumers to be able to afford big purchases like a new car. It's also very much a case specific to this company where they're really trying to remake themselves and struggling to do so.
Craig, where are we now just in kind of the market's perception of overall end demand for EVs? I mean, is this just a bump in the road that an industry that's undergoing a long-term transition we should expect to see, or is there something more fundamental going on out there?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think even folks who cover this just religiously, our colleagues at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, I think they were initially reluctant to sort of come around to this idea of an EV slowdown, and sort of had a view that people were more pessimistic than was really warranted. And this was as a lot of headlines were coming out late last year, early this year. I think when Tesla reported their first quarter deliveries, and it came in so far short of everyone's expectations, the consensus was coming down and down going into that report, and yet even then the company came up tens of thousands of vehicles short of where people were seeing them report. I think even BNEF now is very much concerned about the magnitude of deceleration that we've seen, and the challenges that we're seeing, particularly in a market like the U.S., where you would think that at this point, this many years into this transition, and with all the investment that companies are making, that surely we would start to see more momentum, or at least a healthier continuation of momentum. Instead, we've seen a real slowdown. And I think even Biden's Inflation Reduction Act does a lot of the right things to try and move this part of the industry forward, and yet execution has been a challenge.
Hey, Craig, thanks a lot. Craig Trudell, Bloomberg Global Autos Editor. Super appreciate it. And we are at a Bloomberg NEF conference right now. But I think that does point to the fact that we don't actually know how this will play out, and things are really lumpy. And you can be in a structural shift in different industries and still be a cyclical industry. Like the auto industry is cyclical, right? So, but you can still be in a structural shift. So all of these things can be true. It's just a matter of then how you price it if you're an investor. Yeah. And that gets complicated.
It does get complicated. And I just wonder to what extent, if any, this EV transition, at least in the United States, has become politicized.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Blue, red.
Totally.
And if that's in fact the case, then that really, I think, is a significant roadblock for the mass adoption, the mass volume that the economics demand to get the unit profitability there, because it's not. You barely make a profit at $70,000 or $80,000 a car, and as Kevin Tynan of Bloomberg Intelligence points out, how are you going to make a profit at $30,000 or $40,000?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Well, coming up, we're going to talk to Anna Moskalo. She is Shell Executive VP.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We got the Beige Book coming up, 2 o'clock Wall Street time. Stocks lower right now with the S&P just about at the lows of the day. A drop right now in the S&P of 11 points, down 0.2%. The Dow Industrials are down 70 points, a decline there of 0.2%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is down 61, a drop of just about 0.4%. A relative sense of calm, though, back on Wall Street, with bonds rebounding after a sell-off driven by bets that the Fed will keep rates higher for longer. The 10-year, 4.62%, with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.94%. We've got gold up $4.50 the ounce to $23.87. That's a gain of 0.2%. A further retreat for crude oil today, down 1%, back below $85 a barrel, $84.49 right now on WTI. Sources tell Bloomberg antitrust enforcers are preparing a lawsuit seeking to block fashion company Tapestry's $8.5 billion planned takeover of Capri Holdings. Those sources say the FTC is expected to file a lawsuit as soon as Monday. Tapestry down now by 1%, Capri Holdings lower by 0.7%. Again, recapping, we've got the S&P down 9 now, down 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio, and we are live from Bloomberg NEF Summit Day 2 in the Intercontinental Hotel right here in New York City. The summit really provides a chance for CEOs, thought leaders, world leaders, politicians to kind of get together in a room and talk about the issues facing the energy transition, how you get from 0 to 100, how do you get from here to there in a meaningful way that is also price efficient and makes profits and does stuff and is cheap enough. We spent about, the U.S., I should say, spent about $303 billion last year in transition.
Wow.
Worldwide, over
That's
$1 trillion. And there's still a lot of problems. Things like permitting, demand, trade issues. We just saw earlier today, maybe President Biden will look at an increased tariff from steel and aluminum in China. So how do you deal with that if you're running a company? Well, Anna Moskalo is Chief Executive Vice President of Low Carbon Solutions over at Shell. She's been with Shell for about 20 years and has had many different jobs within the company and has landed here in the past 2 years, right?
2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years. Okay.
Yes.
How's it going?
Well, so it's going well. We are progressing. Energy transition probably is progressing well overall. And we have seen big strides in electrification. But at the same time, in my lifetime, oil demand has doubled. And we still see sectors like aviation, shipping, and commercial road transport, buses and trucks, where we see demand increasing in the coming years. And these sectors need, the hard-to-abate sectors need solutions to support that. So biofuels or biogases.
So I think what we've learned maybe over the last several years with the invasion of Ukraine is just how important, traditional energy, carbon energy is for the global trade. So as we make this transition to a more sustainable energy grid, we still have to invest there. How does your company think about that? How does a huge company like Shell think about that?
It's all about balance, probably, and making sure that we have probably 2 things, that we pace ourselves with our customers in making sure that we transition with the right pace in different places, and that changes by country and by geography, but also that we focus on the solutions where we have a real competitive advantage. If I think about, for example, the LNG market, we have seen LNG actually playing a big role in providing flexible and secure supplies in the last 2 or 3 years.
And LNG is under your purview, right?
LNG is part, yes, of the...
Which is interesting, because not every company is going to look at LNG in the new carbon low solutions business.
Yeah, so the traditional LNG business does not sit with me. But what my team does is actually using the LNG for example, the marine sector. So we match LNG and our traditional position globally in LNG trading with customers. So the marine sector sits with me, and we are transferring and selling LNG for the marine sectors instead of fuel oil, and that provides for lower carbon intensity products.
Are there certain industries that your customers, you mentioned the marine industry, and I didn't even think about that when this discussion started 10 years ago about how they burn so much fuel, but when I see them out on my beach, when I'm sitting on my beach chair, I see the smoke out the back of the thing. So what industries are doing a good job in making the transition, and what maybe industries still need some work from your perspective?
So, as I said, we've made great progress on the decarbonizing through electrification. The areas that are a bit more stubborn are the planes, the trucks, the ships, and also the heavy industry. So industry that need high-intensity heat.
Like cement.
Like cement, steel, fertilizers, chemical industries. And in those cases, you need what we call drop-in fuels, like biofuels or synthetic fuels, whether liquid or gas, so high energy intensity. And different sectors moving at different paces in different regions. And of course, we shouldn't forget that regulatory environment, certainty around how things should develop is very important. Whether it is carrot or stick.
Yeah, we talked a lot carrot and stick on the panel earlier today. You also mentioned when I was talking to you about how you guys look at returns for the different investments. So if you look at oil and gas returns straight up as say 15% plus, then how do you judge the returns for different projects in low carbon solutions?
Yeah, it's important to recognize that different products and different solutions are available at different scales. So for our traditional businesses, we are looking upstream and marketing, we are looking at 15 plus. For biofuels, electrical vehicles, where we have positions today, we are one of the biggest suppliers of biofuels and traders today. For EV, we have already 54,000 charging points globally. So for those one, we are looking at 12%. And for solutions that are not quite there and they need scale, and we've been a bit more selective in our investments, like hydrogen and CCS, it's 10 plus. So we are being targeted around our approach on returns, and that also will change over time as the industry changes. And also when we're looking at our overall investment profile, last year 23% of our capital was spent in low carbon energy solutions, so EV, biofuels, biogases, and renewable generations. That was 5.6 billion, by the way.
You know, boy, I'm looking at your revenue contribution where it comes. I mean, you're truly a global company, obviously, Shell, with roughly a third out of Europe, a third out of Asia and Africa, and a third out of, I guess, the Americas. So truly a global company. Are there certain parts of the world where you have had more success and maybe, you know, in terms of making these investments and seeing change versus some other parts of the world?
We see that it's easier when we have clarity from the regulatory perspective.
Okay.
So Europe, US, Canada, we have seen, whether it is carrot or stick, we have seen clarity around mandates, tax incentives, and so on. But all this being said, by the way, we are also seeing Asia picking up. The way China is going around EVs, for example, and electrical charging points. We are seeing in Southeast Asia development of carbon capture and storage. India also, we made an investment recently in India Spring Energy, where we are investing in renewable generation. So actually Asia, and everybody knows that the moment it comes and it picks up, the volumes will be there.
What's it like being a company in Europe versus if you were a company in the US? In that Europe deals with a lot of sticks, US typically has the carrots, but the governments are supportive in different ways. It's much more bifurcated in the US. What's the hardest part of all of that?
Probably the hardest part is making sure that there are clear trade-offs between sectors. So let me give you an example. If I want to use hydrogen, greener hydrogen, do I use it for commercial road transport, or do I use it for passenger cars? Well, actually, probably passenger cars, I can use it for EV. So making sure that the regulatory environment matches with the sectors you need to address. So hydrogen for commercial road transport in the future, or heavy industries, that would be a solution. So trying to incentivize use of the scarce hydrogen we will have available and we have available into the industry that needs it most. And then the other thing is probably the stability. So these are longer term investments. You need to make investments that are multi-billion over 10, 15 years, 20 years time. You need to have certainty of the regulatory environment and direction of travel. And the industry needs to move in tandem, supply and demand. We cannot build projects if our customers also don't invest. Carbon capture and storage is quite a good one, where our customers need to invest in the capture of the CO2, and we invest in the transport and the storage to bring the CO2 under the ground.
What's the next big road, a milepost that someone like me who doesn't follow this day to day, what should I look for? Is there a piece of news? Is there a piece of legislation or something that's going to be a big milepost that, boy, this industry is continuing to make progress?
We would want to see that carbon pricing is reflected in starting to see that there is an opportunity and incentives for people to switch and move on. That's one trend that you would be looking at. Then stability of the regulatory environment is another one. And then the other thing I would say is there is not a single solution that fits all. So for every sector, we have a roadmap, and we work with our customers to look at what is available. And again, we start from our position of strengths, LNG, EV, biofuels, and then building on that with hydrogen CCS. And probably in the future with direct air capture, if and when that will happen at scale.
Anna, thanks so much. Super appreciate it. Anna Muscolo. She is Shell Executive Vice President for Low Carbon Solutions. Really interesting. And we have more coming up.
I know, more coming up. More
Are you
stuff.
into it?
I am. I'm getting into it. Now
I
that
can see.
You know, you get traditional energy companies and new energy companies, they got to be together, which they are at this conference at least. So we'll see. Anyway, right now, world and national news. Let's go to Mr. John Tucker in New York.
All right, Paul and Alex. The U.S. is going to impose new sanctions on Iran, targeting the country's missile and drone program. This follows its weekend attack on Israel that threatened to push the Middle East into a wider conflict. Let's get more in this report from Bloomberg's Erica Herskowitz.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said Tuesday sanctions would be unveiled in the coming days and added the U.S. is coordinating with Group of 7 nations and other partners on a comprehensive response. The U.S. will also announce sanctions against entities supporting the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Iran's defense ministry and expect allies to follow. Iran's drone and missile attack on Israel over the weekend didn't cause any fatalities or serious damage after being largely intercepted by Israeli defense systems alongside U.S., U.K., and French military assets. Erica Herskowitz, Bloomberg Radio.
Ford is recalling more than 456,000 Bronco Sport and Maverick vehicles because of a battery detection issue that can result in a loss of drive power, increasing the risk of a crash. According to documents published by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the body and powertrain control modules for these cars could fail to detect changes in battery charge. A newly unsealed court document shows U.S. Senator Bob Menendez is prepared to blame his wife at his bribery trial for withholding information about him, from him about gifts they allegedly accepted from businessmen seeking favors. Lawyers for the New Jersey Democrat asked a judge to try him separately from his wife, Nadine. And voting has closed across the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific nation's first general election since the government there switched diplomatic allegiances from Taiwan to Beijing and struck a secret security pact that's raised fears of the Chinese Navy gaining a foothold in the region. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks lower across the board, not just in the red, but lows of the day right now on the S&P 500 index. The S&P trading down by 20. That is a drop of 0.4%, with the S&P right now at 5,030. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 112, a decline right now of 0.3%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index is down by 0.7%, lower by 102 points. The 10-year 4.61%, with a 2-year now yielding 4.93%. Spot gold up 0.1%, 23.86 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude now tumbling 1.5%, 84.09 a barrel. At 2 o'clock Wall Street time, the Federal Reserve will issue the Beige Book Economic Survey based on reports from its 12 district banks stretching from New York to San Francisco. And with a preview, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
People will most likely comb through the Beige Book for commentary on inflation, a day after Fed Chair Jerome Powell said efforts to contain runaway prices have stalled. The central bank next meets on interest rates on April 30th and May 1st, and it's clear the Fed is on hold on easing. Bloomberg Economics says the Beige Book will probably signal a slight increase in economic activity, just like the prior survey. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
America's appetite for imported goods has kept its economy hot, but has yet to, quote, translate into any meaningful pickup in demand for J.B. Hunt Transport Services. That, according to a top executive for the logistics company on its quarterly earnings call. J.B. Hunt reported quarterly earnings per share of $1.22. That was below consensus estimates of $1.53. J.B. Hunt trading lower now by 8.1%. Again, recapping, we do have stocks in the red. S&P down 20 to 5,031, a drop of 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. We are live at the Bloomberg NEF Summit right here in Midtown Manhattan, where we're covering all the top regulators, officials, CEOs, analysts, strategy officers within the energy transition space. How do you get from oil and gas to something different, and what does that actually wind up looking like? So here's a quiz for you.
Yep.
What is the third best performing stock in the S&P this year?
I'm going to guess it's an energy stock.
Yes, it is.
Ding, 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 ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Paul's the best. It is Constellation Energy, which is the largest nuclear power facility in the country. It also is the largest provider of power to like C&I customers. And that's really interesting because you have Supermicro as the best performing stock, then NVIDIA, and then you have Constellation Energy, GE, and NRG Energy. And what all of this has in common is a lot of demand for data centers, a boost in power demand, and a need for that power. And nuclear is really front and center for that. So joining us now to discuss is Kathleen Barron. She's Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer. She joins us now here at the summit. Kathleen, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Alex. Happy to be here.
So, funnily enough, I talked to your CEO yesterday on TV. So, if you guys want to hear more about nuclear, you can check out that segment from Bloomberg Television, The Close. Let's talk about what other stuff you guys are doing. Nuclear, obviously, bread and butter. In the energy transition space, of which nuclear is a big part, what else are you guys doing, looking at, paying money for?
Well, one of the opportunities we see ahead of our country is to find ways to decarbonize industrial sector. It's a huge source of emissions, and it's really hard to find a way to run steel manufacturing, agriculture, aviation, long-haul shipping on electricity, right? So we have to find another way to decarbonize that sector and find a liquid or gaseous or a solid fuel that we're going to have at the ready at any moment to power those industries. And hydrogen has emerged as an opportunity for the U.S. now that the Inflation Reduction Act has passed. There's a production tax credit for hydrogen in that act, and we see nuclear and hydrogen as an ideal pairing because, as you pointed out, nuclear is clean, but it's also firm, it's reliable, it runs 24/7, and so it can be a steady source of power to run into an electrolyzer, split water into oxygen and hydrogen, and then create that clean molecule that can power industrial applications.
What color is that?
Fuel. Well, we're trying to discourage the rainbow of colors and just talk about clean versus emitting,
Copy.
but it is called pink for what it's worth.
Okay, just so we're clear.
Yep. So I was fascinated to know, I didn't know much about your company. Your company has the largest or the biggest nuclear fleet in the country with 21 reactors. What is the future of nuclear energy in this country as we, again, think about more green types of energy sources?
You know, it has changed a lot, even just in the last few years, in terms of public acceptance for the technology.
Totally.
It makes, I mean, not just our fleet, but the nuclear fleet generally generates 20% of the electricity that runs through this building we're in and in our economy every day. People don't really realize that, but it is the backbone of the power sector, and it is carbon-free, and as we just talked about, very reliable. It operates around the clock, no matter the weather, sun, wind, rainstorm. It's still operating. And we own 21 reactors. We operate 21 reactors. We own 23. And so that's about a quarter of the U.S. fleet. And the beauty of these machines is that they can run for a very long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our assets are sort of in the 30, 40, 50-year-old time frame. But they can run up to 80 years, according to the federal safety regulators in Washington. And so they are constantly being rebuilt. We put in about $1.5 billion of new capital every year, and we're replacing the components. It's kind of like an old car that's having its parts replaced regularly. So these machines can run for a very long time. They abate about 500 million metric tons of carbon every year. So it's in the nation's interest to keep them running, and with this growing public acceptance, we're seeing interest in corporate procurements, we're seeing interest from governments, we're seeing people valuing this thing that we don't have enough of, which is a clean, firm megawatt hour.
So when we talk about the hydrogen stuff, so pink, so basically you would get the power to split the hydrogen from the oxygen and the electrolyzer using nuclear.
Chemistry.
Does that mean that if I'm building a hydrogen facility, I have to go where your power plant is, or are you going to be building a power plant, a small modular power plant near me, or are we running like a big tube of something in between me and you?
So what we're talking about is using the existing reactors to power an electrolyzer and, as you said, split the oxygen and the hydrogen. You could do that right up next to the power plant, so you put the electricity right into the electrolyzer, or you could put your electrolyzer next to your manufacturing plant or whatever process you're trying to use the hydrogen for. Let's say you're making sustainable aviation fuel, and we can ship the electricity over the transmission line to your electrolyzer with a dedicated power purchase agreement. That's sort of hydrogen by wire configuration. So either co-located with the plant or through the transmission line. Either way, you're going to have that steady source of zero carbon electricity going into the electrolyzer every hour.
Can I go out and build a nuclear power plant in this country today?
There is no reason why you can't. But thank you, Alex. You know, there are a bunch of reactor technology developers who have new designs. You mentioned small modular reactors that are in the process of getting licensed. And there are some utilities who have created relationships with those technology developers for sort of, co-development or, an advanced commitment. But none of them are under construction just yet. Some of them are going to be starting soon. For example, in Canada, the Ontario Power Generator has partnered with the GE 300 megawatt reactor design and they think they have been through regulatory approvals and they will start construction sooner. But in the U.S., we've lagged. I mean, this is happening in Canada, it's happening overseas, and we don't have that sort of market pull here. We don't have commitments as much as we should to get those new reactor designs through licensing and into construction and past that first-of-a-kind cost cycle. That's really the thing that we need to overcome.
Yeah, we kind of jumped over nuclear for a while, right? Like when I first started covering commodities 17 years ago, it was all uranium because of the nuclear stuff, and then it was like, we don't talk about that right now. And even Germany was like anti-nuclear for a while. They retired all their fleets, and now they're like, oopsie, what happens when Russia invades Ukraine? Kathleen, so great to get your perspective. That was really great. Love to see how that relationship pans out between hydrogen and nuclear. Kathleen Barron, she's Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer over at Constellation Energy.
I'm learning a lot these past couple days.
I'm so happy.
All in.
I thought you were going to be so bored.
No,
I'm so
this is
psyched.
Cool. Yeah,
Yay.
a little bit more chemistry than I thought. I didn't think there would be math here, but I'll figure it out.
It's helpful with the H2O. It's like, right, okay.
Yes, I got
2
that.
hydrogen, 1 oxygen.
Yep.
We got this. We can do this.
Yep.
We can do math.
Yeah, my chemistry teacher in high school, Mrs. B. So.
Nice, remember her name. All right. Equities trading around the lows of the session. I was trying to look for a headline that showed why. It was hard to find it. The S&P is now down by 21 points, about 0.4%. You are seeing some buying come into the bond market a little bit there on that safe haven bid. This is Bloomberg.
is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly. We're Monzo. Give us a go.
See? I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
Lenders face pressure to pay more for deposits. The Minneapolis-based bank says it now expects net interest income of $16.1 billion to $16.4 billion this year, after previously guiding to $16.6 billion or more this year. Shares are trading lower now by 4.9%. Those are our top company stories, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. You're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence Radio, and Paul and I are live from the Bloomberg NEF Summit right here in Midtown Manhattan. We're going to keep you updated on all the world and national news as well. Here is John Tucker. John?
All right, Alex, the Senate Commerce Committee holding a hearing today to review a report of Boeing's safety culture by a panel of experts convened by the FAA. The report faults Boeing for ineffective procedures and a breakdown in communications between senior management and other members of the staff. Javier De Luis, an aerospace engineer, lost his sister in a 737 MAX crash. He helped compile the report.
We're finding that there exists a disconnect, for lack of a better word, between the words that are being said by Boeing management and what is being seen and experienced by employees across the company. They hear safety is our #1 priority, but what they see is that that's only true as long as your production milestones are met, and at that point, it's push it out the door as fast as you can.
Boeing officials are not present, with leaders such as Chief Executive Officer Dave Calhoun expected to face lawmakers at a later date. Lebanon's Hezbollah launched drones and guided missiles at an army site in Israel's Galilee in an attack that wounded at least 6 people amid mounting tensions in the region. Meantime, Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz said Israel has the right to react to Iran's weekend missile and drone attack. He's calling for sanctions on Iran's missile program. Well, Senate Democrats could end the impeachment trial of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas today. Before arguments even begin, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, is expected to call votes to dismiss 2 articles of impeachment against Mayorkas after senators are sworn in as jurors, a move that could scuttle the trial. And former U.S. Senator and 2-term Florida Governor Bob Graham, who gained national prominence as chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee in the aftermath of the 2001 terror attacks and as an early critic of the Iraq War, has died. He was 87 years old. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker. Yeah, all right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that, as always. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, we are live here at the Bloomberg NEF Conference. That's New Energy Finance here at the Continental Hotel, Midtown Manhattan. Alex, this is all hat to you. It's all kind of new to me. But what I've noticed from just the attendees here, it's kind of everybody in the energy space. They got to do this together. I'm thinking about the energy producers like the Shells and the Chevrons of the world, the energy consumers, whether it's transportation or whatever, and obviously government officials as well. Kind of everybody's here, and it feels like everybody's kind of moving. It kind of feels like most people are on kind of a similar page, if not the same page. But it's going to be a long time making this transition.
Yeah, it's going to be a really long time. And something that Anna Moskalo from Shell was saying earlier when I was on a panel with her is that it's going to be layer upon layer upon layer. So like this technology and this fuel maybe works, and then you're going to add this to it, and then you add this to it as all of it becomes economic. It's not like you're going to turn your light and all of a sudden it's going to switch off from natural gas to wind, full stop, see you later, bye-bye. That it's a process. It does feel like companies and world leaders are coming to terms with that, because that's not how it felt like it was initially billed a few years ago. And that's a nice takeaway for me for a summit like this.
Yeah. I think the other thing I'm taking away, again, is just kind of a neophyte here, and this kind of goes back to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. There's still a huge place for fossil fuels, as there will be for the foreseeable future. So there's going to be a transition. I guess that really is the right word to think about it, is probably some type of gradual transition from fossil fuels to maybe a little bit more higher reliance on non-fossil fuels.
So this is a great point, because I feel like that is not well understood.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. And I don't know if it's a communication issue, if it's sort of big oil and their checkered past, and I'm like 30, 40 years ago, and sort of choices they did or didn't make, is that sort of educating the consumer on how you do stuff.
Yep.
Because when you go very far up the supply chain, things get much more complicated, and how far do you want to go there? So I don't know. Hopefully summits like this will eventually help, and broadcasts like ours will help too.
Exactly. And so we got
plug.
the good folks at BNEF. They're doing this every day, looking at the transition. Balance of Power, Joe Matthew, right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Still no bill. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As Washington waits for word on legislation to fund Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and more. With plans to vote in the House, we hear on Saturday now, but there's still no bill. We'll get the latest from Bloomberg straight ahead. Mike Dorning covering that for us on Capitol Hill. And as Ukraine runs low on ammunition and morale, we'll bring you a conversation with Ian Kelly, the former U.S. ambassador to Georgia, for his take on the fallout on the other side of the world here. We'll also have the latest from the campaign trail as President Biden talks tariffs in Pennsylvania, and the Arizona Senate race gets a re-rating. Our signature panel's in place. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. It's all after a look at Wall Street. Let's start now with trading in New York And Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. Joe Matthew, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, all in the red right now. In fact, very close to session lows on the S&P. Right now, we're down 18 at 5,032, a drop of 0.4%. The Dow down 89 now, down 0.2%, while NASDAQ lower by 95, a drop there of 0.6%. Bottom line here, relative calm returning to global markets, bonds rebounding after a sell-off driven by bets that the Fed will keep rates higher for longer. The 10-year 4.60% with the 2-year today at 4.93%. Spot gold, little changed, up $1 the ounce to $23.84, up by about 0.1%. And a retreat right now for West Texas Intermediate crude oil, down 2.4%, tumbling $2 a barrel. A WTI now at $83.33 for a barrel of crude. Wall Street, though, paying close attention to comments from numerous Fed speakers, including Jay Powell yesterday. Matthew Rowe is head of portfolio management at Nomura Capital Management.
There's a complicating factor of it being an election year, and there are stubborn aspects of inflation, like insurance costs for real estate, like the cost of crude oil, that have an inflationary impact on the market that is somewhat outside the control of the immediate policy decisions.
Nomura's Matt Rowe was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television. United Airlines holding shares are surging by 14% after the carrier last night forecast better than expected profit this quarter, tempering concerns that Boeing aircraft delays and regulatory pressure will put expansion plans at risk. Again, right now, Boeing up by 13.3%. Again, recapping, stocks lower with the S&P down 22, a drop right now of 0.4%. Balance of power continues now. And back we go to Washington. Once again, here's your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg, the fastest show in politics, waiting ever longer for actual legislation here. They still haven't dropped the bill. Everyone's talking about it like it exists, but not in reality yet. Maybe that happens before this program is out because we understand it's imminent. The bill I'm talking about would be actually bills. One for Ukraine, one for Israel, one for Taiwan, then another piece of legislation to bring in things like the Repo Act, maybe TikTok, all of this foreign policy. Remember the emergency funding request at the end of last year that already passed the Senate? This is the House's attempt to try to do all of this through a series of votes. Pretty amazing that we're not there yet because, again, we're talking about a Saturday vote, and that's just the House. In the Senate, hold on, J.D. Vance just tweeted, rumored course of action in the House. Combine Ukraine and Israel aid with other Biden boondoggles. Send it all to the Senate as a combined package. Then let the House vote on a fake border security package that has no chance. He calls it betrayal and stupid politics to boot. Mike Dorning joins us to clear a path here to maybe some truth, helping to edit our coverage in Washington from Capitol Hill to our bureau here downtown D.C. It's good to see you, Mike.
Great to be here.
We are expecting something before this day is out, correct?
Yes. Speaker Johnson just sent a text to all the members, which our reporters on the Hill quickly saw, outlining the conditions that would be in the bill, and we expect to have text imminently.
So that means all these meetings Mike Johnson's been having with conservative Republicans who are upset with him, not to mention the motion to vacate hanging over his head with now 2 names on it. He's actually holding the line on his plan that he unveiled Sunday night.
Yeah, he had said he was going to release this plan yesterday, so everyone was wondering, it dragged on into the night, and in the morning we didn't get it, and we knew that hardliners were furious with him and trying to talk him out of it. But in the end, just before noon today, he stuck with it and said, I'm going to press forward with my plan. So now we have to watch the hardliners and see how they react. We have, as you mentioned, 2 hardliners that had already said they would, participate in a coup attempt and try to overthrow him. But they need to get more hardliners into the overthrow. Democrats, meanwhile, have been saying that if the Ukraine aid plan essentially does the same thing as the Senate version of the bill, and maybe has a few other minor tweaks, they would, at least for the time being, back Johnson. So we still haven't seen the exact provisions in the bill. The Democrats are waiting for that. But the Democratic cavalry might save him at least temporarily if this bill meets some conditions.
So this is just a brutal mission for Tom Emmer, the majority whip, right? You're not just whipping one, you're whipping 4 bills now, and everybody's angry at somebody. Do we believe that they are counting votes to pass them?
Yes, certainly they're counting votes to pass them, but actually part of the reason they broke them up into separate bills was to make it easier to get the bills passed. You can have Ukraine aid that all the Democratic progressives will go along with, while the ultra-conservatives can all vote against it. And then you can have Israel aid that the Democratic progressives won't vote for because it doesn't require rules, but all the ultra-conservatives will vote for it.
But I get the logic to splitting them up, but there's a war room somewhere with now 4 bills on it, and this guy's got to be up all night. It's a massive jigsaw puzzle.
But they did that to make it easier.
Understood. So how, though, then stitching it back together, the Frankenstein strategy, as I've been calling it, could be the complicated part here. And then let's say this goes great. They pass everything. They put them all together somehow, and Frankenstein walks over to the Senate. Yeah. Should we be assuming that passes when you have J.D. Vance calling this betrayal?
Well, I don't think they were counting on J.D. Vance's vote to begin with. But I think that if it basically meets the conditions that Senator Schumer and President Biden want, that they're willing to live with, I think it will pass the Senate. It might take some time because folks like J.D. Vance and others might drag it out a bit. But remember, in the Senate, you've got more support for this among Republicans than you do in the House.
Sure, yes. Although I wonder what happens when there's no border provision in there like that bill that passed the Senate had, but we're about to find out, Mike. It's great to have you back.
Great to be here.
By the way, Mike joined us just as he was coming up for air, editing a story that just hit the terminal. If you want to see what's going on, look at the terminal at Bloomberg.com. Great work as always, Mike. Thank you for bringing us inside the process here. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where we talk to a lot of politicians. We will later today. That's part of our job, to hear from D's and R's, the way they feel about this, what their motives are, and the way they think that it's going to come out. But of course, it's a different conversation when you're talking to an elected official than a true expert in the field. We've been working on a daily basis to try to bring you both. It's our job here to talk to the folks who are representing you in Washington on Capitol Hill. But then there's a voice like Ambassador Ian Kelly, who has served a career in diplomacy and understands the impact that the funding debate has in the real world, what's actually happening on the ground in a place like Ukraine. Ambassador in residence for International Studies and Slavic Languages Literature, Northwestern University, former ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Georgia, and former U.S. ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining. It's great to see you here as we talk about whether we're going to see a vote Saturday, whether it will take weeks or even months to start making the shells and other munitions that this money would help to buy for use in Ukraine. We're also reading stories today about low morale, units that have been waiting weeks, if not months, for ammunition. What is the real impact of this delay in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And there's a real impact on, especially on the frontline fighters. They're unable to respond to Russian artillery because they have to ration their shells. In some places, they're outshelled by 10 to 1. And there's a morale aspect, besides the fact that they can't respond as they have been able to, and that's that they have really felt that the U.S. and NATO had their backs. But in the last few months, of course, the bipartisan support, much of it seems to have melted away. And so that it really does affect the morale of these soldiers on the front line. It affects the morale of everyday Ukrainians. So there is a real, I think, measurable impact on public opinion and on the morale of soldiers.
The reporting I referenced in Politico this morning that refers to morale and ammunition shortages, units that have not had a shell to fire in a month, carries the headline, Ambassador, Ukraine is heading for defeat. It says the West's failure to send weapons to Kyiv is helping Putin win his war. Some think that maybe he has already won, or I guess a better way to put it is Ukraine may have already lost because of the foot dragging here in Washington. Do you agree?
Well, it certainly has given aid and comfort to Vladimir Putin, this months-long knockdown, drag-out fight over whether to continue supporting Ukraine. The Ukrainians are very much determined not to allow Putin to take over their country. They've seen what it means to live under occupation in places like Bucha, where dozens of civilians were massacred. So there's, I think, quite a determination to continue resisting. But, of course, Russia has 3 times the population of Ukraine, has a much bigger industrial capacity. In the long term, it doesn't look good unless they have the kind of high technology that we can offer and the kind of industrial capacity that we can offer.
So if there is no funding here, if this mechanism that we're looking at now, another swing, another attempt in Washington doesn't work out, Ukraine will lose. We can say that out loud, right?
I don't think it will end the war. I mean, even if Russia is able to break through and take territory, we will continue to have a war there because there will continue to be resistance. I think another real damage that this long drawn-out battle has had is we're beginning to look like an unreliable ally to overseas. And we also are being seen as perhaps being willing to let aggression stand if we don't pass this aid. So there's just a number of very damaging developments that could come out of this, both to Ukrainians and I think to our own reputation.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that very thing. You also served as a State Department spokesman under Secretary Hillary Clinton. And so I know you appreciate the impact of rhetoric, perception, when it comes to international relations. And we've heard this before, Ambassador. We had a conversation with Andrzej Duda of Poland, who told us right here at Bloomberg that a failure in this case to act and taking it even a step further to talk about a weakening NATO, for instance, if Donald Trump were reelected, would provoke other countries to consider starting their own nuclear programs. What would be the fallout in Europe specifically among our NATO allies if the U.S. fails to act?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. I think that's really kind of an underappreciated result of this war in Ukraine. The United States and most NATO allies have withheld, I think, quite a few very necessary weapons like long-range artillery and aviation for fear of provoking Putin from using nuclear weapons. And so the lesson that a lot of powers draw around the world is if you want to be immune to any kind of concerted Western response to your to aggression, just have a few nukes and you will be safe. No one is going to try and do to you what the Americans did to Iraq, for example. There won't be. Don't have to worry about regime change. This is a serious issue, I think, that really needs to be addressed more.
Well, that's pretty scary stuff to consider here, Ambassador. Let's look at the other side of the coin. Let's say this money is passed potentially this weekend. We're talking about a Saturday vote in the House. We have the president's signature the next week or so. Would the window have closed by the time we can get material to Ukraine? We were told by the administration they were running out of ammo at the end of last year. There are questions about too little, too late. Or could Ukraine use that moment to start pushing back and maybe punch through its lines with Russia?
Well, I think we are reaching that point where we won't be able to provide Ukraine with even the weapons to defend itself. There was some bridge funding that the Defense Department found, but we're reaching the point where that's going to run out too. But there's still time. I mean, the time of war making, of campaigning, as they used to say, is in the summer and early fall. So if we can expedite these weapons to Ukraine, yes, I think that they could go on the offensive, and it certainly would be a blow to Putin and the narrative that he's pushing, is that all we have to do is wait for the aid to stop, for Ukraine to fall into Russia's hands like a ripe fruit.
So his best hope right now, Vladimir Putin's great hope, is that this funding does not pass?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's I think that they're really focused on it. Both Russia and Ukraine are very focused on it. A Ukrainian told me the other day that the first thing that troops do when they wake up in the morning is check their phones to see if the funding has passed, and I'm sure people in the Kremlin are paying as close attention too, for different reasons.
Jeez, wow. Ambassador, I'm glad you could join us. Come talk to us again. Ian Kelly, Ambassador in Residence for International Studies at Northwestern University, spent time as U.S. Ambassador to Georgia, as well as the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The voices of experience you can count on here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. Find us now by searching Bloomberg Global News. We've saved a seat for you in the studio. We'll bring in Wendy Benjaminson next to look at what is or is not about to happen on Capitol Hill. This is Bloomberg.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We are looking at a down day with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. Tech mega caps certainly weighing on stocks today. Right now, NASDAQ is down 130 points, a drop there of 0.8%. The NASDAQ 100 index, full of those big tech names, down by 1%. S&P, to put it all in context, down 26 right now at 5,025. That is a drop for the S&P of just about 0.5%. The Dow down 94, a decline right now of 0.2%. 10-year, 4.60% with a 2-year ahead of the beige book, 4.93%. Spot gold down $1.68 the ounce to $23.81, a decline of just about 0.1%. And steep losses for West Texas Intermediate crude selling off now by 2.7%. A barrel of WTI now at 83.03. Sources tell Bloomberg U.S. antitrust enforcers are preparing a lawsuit to block fashion company Tapestry's $8.5 billion planned takeover of Capri Holdings. Those sources say the FTC is expected to file a lawsuit as soon as Monday. Tapestry down now by 0.4%, Capri lower by 1%. Again, recapping, sell-off underway with the S&P down 31 now, drop there of 0.6%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, here he is, your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thanks for being with us here. We'll get back to Charlie for an update on trading later this hour, as always, with our eye on Capitol Hill and just no idea how this day is going to end. It's another jump ball, or 4 jump balls in this case, for Speaker Mike Johnson, whose career is on the line right now as he stares down the barrel of what could be 4 grueling votes on Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and then another Frankenstein bill within this massive Frankenstein effort that could include TikTok or LNG or repo. We don't know. The Rules Committee doesn't know when there's going to be a hearing, and lawmakers can't say how they're going to vote on it because they haven't read it, which brings me to telling you that we still have no bill. Remember, we were going to have one around this time yesterday. Wendy Benjaminson has been helping edit our coverage here. Bloomberg Washington senior editor is with us at the table now. She doesn't know what story she's about to edit. That's the world we're in. It's great to see you, as always. We're talking about a Saturday vote. Can this all come together in time?
It could. I mean, it would involve working hard for the staff to try to pull together these bills. But you're absolutely right that Speaker Johnson has forged ahead after late-night talks with the Freedom Caucus and the ultra-right wing of the party. He is forging ahead with 4 bills and maybe even another border security bill. And as you and I were talking about, I mean, the guy may not be Sam Rayburn, but he is trying to get something done here, you know, amid Democrats trying to decide whether they'll save him or not, and this right-wing caucus ready to throw him out, you know, if they don't like anything in any of these bills. So, but he is sticking to the path and offering up these 4 bills and says there will be votes on Saturday. Let's see.
I won't even ask you about the Senate yet because God knows they don't know what
Yeah.
they're going to receive. But his job is on the line here. As I mentioned, you've got Tom Massey joining Marjorie Taylor Greene in a motion to vacate. Hard to tell if this is workable because I keep hearing Democrats are going to come to his rescue here. Is Mike Johnson counting on that, or is he dreading that moment? Because if that happens, he's not really a Republican speaker anymore.
He isn't, except that he is a Republican and
course,
Speaker of the House.
You know what I mean by
yeah,
the perception, though, right?
I do. It seems like he is trying very hard to govern while politics is crashing all around him, right? The Democrats want to read these bills and see what's in it, see if they can live with it. If they can live with it, then they will figure out some way, either through a maneuver like them all just not showing up for work the day that they're going to motion to vacate, so the threshold is higher and he will save his job. They may vote to keep him just because they don't want to go through the whole drama that they did with Kevin McCarthy again. So, you know, and then on the other side, he never knows when someone's going to try to throw him out of his job. Remember, though, that the bulk of the Republican conference is also tired of these shenanigans. They just want to start to pass some legislation. They've got to go home and campaign for their jobs and say to their constituents, here's what I did this year. And if all you did this year was play high school cafeteria, who's the most popular kid, then I don't know if voters would be that thrilled to reelect them.
Yeah, fascinating. Tom Emmer's got a job on his hands right now.
Yes, he does.
And, as majority whip, he needs to somehow get all of these passed, and they each have their own equation. The word recently was that he was going to bury the hatchet with Donald Trump. Is he the speaker in waiting?
He could be the speaker in waiting. I mean, if the way this House caucus works, the Republican caucus, I should say, is that if Donald Trump says it, then it will happen. I mean, remember one of the time recently I was here and a congresswoman had said, as written, this is done.
Yes, right.
Because Donald Trump had
written.
posted on Truth Social that this bill should die, so she says, as written. So they literally take what he says as gospel. So if Emmer was successful in, getting to yes with Donald Trump, then I would say he's the only one out there who wants this job.
Amazing to think that that's even possible at this point. I wonder if Mike Johnson does
good
or
question.
wants to keep it. As we spend time with Wendy Benjaminson, one of the other big stories impacting here comes from Arizona, or at least it's about Arizona by way of Virginia, in fact. Sabato's crystal ball. We talked to Kyle Kondik and Larry Sabato himself, the namesake of this political research operation at the University of Virginia, and their ratings are pretty important on races like the Senate race in Arizona. They have moved it from toss-up to leans Democratic. This is Kari Lake and Ruben Gallego.
Right.
And it's because of a single issue. And everyone can probably guess. Well, maybe not. It's not the border. It's abortion.
It's abortion.
Yeah.
It is entirely abortion. There is, I think the Arizona Supreme Court, it was last week, said that the state could enforce an 1864 law that bans abortion almost entirely. I don't think there are any exceptions, maybe for life of the mother, but that's it. Rape victims, incest victims, no abortions for them. And Arizona, which is a famously maverick, independent state, thinking state, all said, wait, what? What just happened here? And they have a ballot measure, a referendum on the November ballot to codify abortion rights into law. This is already a motivating factor.
Yes.
And then when the Supreme Court dropped this bomb that they were going to enforce this total ban, Arizonans just decided, I think, that they're going to come out and force.
That referendum is really significant, though, because that's action-oriented. That is something that they can organize around, and it will have an impact on the rest of the ballot, right?
It will. It will. I mean, Biden could win Arizona again on abortion rights coattails.
How about that?
Because that's what voters are enthusiastic about. We're seeing this in the polling. Abortion does drive them to the polls, even if Joe Biden cannot.
It's incredible to think that in a state where the border is so important, he could win that on a separate issue. Just reinforcing the idea that this has been, in many ways, a self-inflicted wound for Republicans.
Absolutely. And, we saw Kari Lake last week put out this video, which sounded a lot like she was being pro-choice. She said, she was happy when she found out she was pregnant, but not all women are. But then it turned out the only choice was if you're a rape or incest victim, you could get an abortion, as well as if your life was in danger, which isn't quite where Arizona women are on this issue.
Well, her evolution on this issue is fascinating to me, and I wonder if that factored into this re-rating, because she's been exposed, and people are seeing every time a commercial comes on, a commercial break, her history of statements on this. At one point, she called this law a model for the rest of the country.
Exactly, and Ruben Gallego's campaign very smartly put together a bunch of clips of her saying, this Arizona law is great, I'm pro-life, I'm fully against abortion in all circumstances, so to counter that video. And so far it seems to be working.
Arizona, of course, a swing state that we're looking at.
Absolutely.
In our polling, it's one of 7 that we consider important. And it starts to get difficult for Donald Trump, who's been leading in these states, if you start picking off of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and then a place like Arizona. And then we all start looking at Maryland to figure out if Larry Hogan can make history there. And maybe there's a wild card. But it is so tight right now, you really can't predict any of these races, never mind the balance of power in Congress.
Right, exactly. And Arizona is somewhat unique in that it has one population center. You have to carry Maricopa County, which is Phoenix, and then the rest of the state is so diffuse geographically that it's hard to get any sort of all momentum from them. And Maricopa County is a city. People will come out for the referendum. So Arizona, even though our polling shows Trump leading there now, that could change with the driver of abortion.
The text is out, Wendy. We're living through it together.
Oh, my gosh.
Headline on the terminal: House Republicans release text of Ukraine-Israel aid bills. I presume that includes the rest.
Do we have time to read it
I don't
right
know
now?
what the, can somebody walk this thing in? The printers are going to be churning for a minute. We're going to take a good look at this to see how close it mirrors what Speaker Johnson was talking about on Sunday night. How do they do 4 votes this quickly? Everyone's just, we're going to have some late night sessions here. Drag out the cots.
Right.
And bring
It's
in the
going to be
takeout.
around the clock weekend.
Well, this is going to be
And then
remarkable.
hopefully they get it to the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the Senate works Sunday and Monday, which are days they don't normally work.
Well, that's a lot better than we were told. This could be until June by the
That's
time we
right.
have this figure.
But then, of course, they're going to be out for Passover at the beginning of next week. I think they have a whole week off for Passover.
Yes,
Even though
recess time again.
Yeah.
So it's probably a working weekend then. If they can actually, if the
Definitely.
House gets this done, and we don't have too many major hangups, and there's going to be some slow walking in the Senate.
Yes.
Wait till Rand Paul weighs in. Wait till J.D. Vance weighs in again. You could be in a world in which the president could sign something next week.
Absolutely.
That's best
And
case scenario.
And if Mike Johnson gets this through, then this congressman no one heard of who steps in Kevin McCarthy's wake is the hero of the weekend.
For somebody.
For somebody. Well, yes, for maybe not Marjorie Taylor Greene, but for getting something done.
Well, we'll see if she makes good on her promise, which was to make that a privileged resolution if he brought Ukraine funding to the floor, right? She technically has not rescinded that promise.
She hasn't. But she hasn't also gone into the well to actually pull the trigger.
That's
either.
right. That's what we'll have to watch for, and whether Tom Massey shows up for her as well. He was ready to kick John Boehner out of the Speaker's office.
Right.
Maybe he'll try to do it again.
There's a history of this.
Wendy will always have this moment when the text was released. Wendy Benjaminson with us. You're a senior. You should probably get out there and figure out
I
where you're
probably
going to
should,
edit a
yes.
story right now. Our Washington senior editor. For more world and national news, before we assemble our panel on this, we turn to Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. The Senate Commerce Committee is also holding a hearing today. It's reviewing a report of the company's safety culture at Boeing by a panel of experts convened by the FAA. It was published in February, the report faulting Boeing for ineffective procedures and a breakdown in communications. Javier De Luis is an aerospace engineer. He lost his sister in a 737 MAX crash and helped compile the report.
We're finding that there exists a disconnect, for lack of a better word, between the words that are being said by Boeing management and what is being seen and experienced by employees across the company.
Aerospace engineer Javier De Luis. Boeing officials are not at that hearing. They're going to face lawmakers later. The FAA, meanwhile, grounded all Alaska Airlines flights nationwide after a request by the company. CNBC is reporting it's a technical issue. Alaska Airlines has not confirmed that. The halt affects all of Alaska's mainline and subcarrier operations. National security officials still warning that the U.S. remains in what they call a, quote, heightened threat environment given worldwide events. But they're also quick to point out there are no known credible threats to the U.S. at this time. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas tells CBS News they know what they're looking for.
What we worry about is an increase in what we call domestic violent extremism, the radicalization of individuals already here, driven to violence based on an ideology of hate.
And remember, the Senate is weighing articles of impeachment against Mayorkas today in the Senate. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks continue to move to the right and down, with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all in the red. In fact, right now we've got the S&P at the worst level of the day, right to the numbers. S&P down 34 now at 5,016. That is a drop today of 0.7%. Dow Industrials down 125, a decline right now of 0.3%. The NASDAQ 100 index down now by 209 points, a drop of 1.2%. The NASDAQ Composite Index is down 167 for NASDAQ, a drop right now of just about 1.1%. 10-year, 4.60%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.92%. Spot gold down $11 the ounce to $23.71, a drop of 0.5%. Crude hit hard now, moving back below $83 a barrel, $82.66 on WTI, a drop right now of 0.5%. Mortgage rates rose last week, hitting a 4-month high, and that points to trouble for both buyers and builders. More from Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
We're looking at more than 7% on the typical home mortgage, 7.13% to be precise. Data earlier in the week suggested rising mortgage rates are denting home builder confidence, and they're on track now to go even higher after Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said inflation is still too high for easing. We'll get data on home resales Thursday. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
And coming up at 2 o'clock Wall Street time, we get the beige book from the Federal Reserve. Again, recapping, stocks are lower. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ very much in the red. S&P now down by 32 points, a decline of 0.6%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington, and here is your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. With breaking news here from Washington, glad you're joining us on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. We've got the text. They just dropped the bill a couple of moments ago, or bills, I should say. Having previewed this yesterday, we told you there would be 4 separate bills, and here they are. I'm looking at an appropriations committee summary of what we've got here. We have a team pouring through hundreds of pages right now in the newsroom, and there is a lot here. For Israel, the security supplemental totals $26 billion to support Israel in its effort, it says, to defend itself against Iran and its proxies, and to reimburse U.S. military operations in response to recent attacks. $4 billion alone here to replenish the Iron Dome and David Sling missile defense systems. Ukraine, $60 billion, there it is, just like the president asked for and we saw pass the Senate, $60.84 billion to address the conflict in Ukraine and assist our regional partners. It reads 23 of that to replenish defense articles and defense services provided to Ukraine, another $11 billion for current U.S. military operations. That's before we send money to Kyiv. And then you've got Indo-Pac. This is Taiwan, $8 billion to continue efforts to counter communist China, it says, and ensure strong deterrence in the region. There is a 4th bill that we're hearing about that would include a divest or ban TikTok, that would include the Repo Act, and would also delineate whether this money to Ukraine would come in the form of a loan. I'll let you know when we have our hands on that as we assemble our panel with the news happening before our eyes. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano with us now, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick, he managed to get the text out. It came out a lot later than expected, but we're hearing talk of a Saturday vote and a working weekend potentially for the Senate. Can they get this done based on what you see?
Yeah, I think that they certainly have the time to do it. It just depends on how hard they want to work and how long into potential Passover holiday week that they're looking at. And I do think it's going to be close. You're right. It's not a gimme. The voting probably won't start until later in the evening on Saturday based on the clock. And they're going to allow amendments, which I think is generous on the part of the speaker, which would gum up the process a bit. That being said, once they finish one bill, that can shoot over to the Senate. They can act on that while they wait for the second bill. So you can create a little bit of a factory warehouse for legislation here and hopefully get it done before the stroke of midnight. And I am quite confident that the president would be more than happy to spend the time next week signing these bills one by one, since basically it's giving him exactly what he asked for months and months ago.
It sure is. Over $95 billion here in foreign aid, Jeannie, just like the bill that passed the Senate. A lot of conservative Republicans are upset we don't have border provisions here. There's been talk about adding H.R. 2. When you step back and look at this, knowing that they could have passed that bill the end of last year, I believe, when it came through the Senate. Remind me on the timeline here, if you will, but it's been some time now. So they're going to get all the money passed for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and nothing on the border. Is that right? Is that a win for Republicans?
Many of them don't think so. And I think I think we should underscore, they may get all that passed. I think the devil here is really in the details. And people are right now starting to pour through these details. So we have top line figures, but we have to read down, are there conditions on the aid for Israel? What is the pay for as it pertains to Ukraine? All of these things are going to matter. But, Mike Johnson getting this out now with the 72-hour rule, he is really up against it because it is going to be close if these pass, and he loses Mike Gallagher on Friday. And of course, if you have Marjorie Taylor Greene and Massey, they just need one more then to discharge and a simple majority to oust him. And you look at the comments by some of the people, that we've heard from, even in the Senate today, Republicans who we didn't think would vote for the bill, but are sounding this alarm, then you see how tricky this is going to get for Mike Johnson. So good for him for getting this out. But this is not over by any means right now. And if he wants to hold on to his job, that's still a big question mark.
Well, we're going to get to that here. By the way, producer James keeping me honest. This is $95 billion. The final tally on the Biden supplemental was $106 billion. You saw the tweet here from J.D. Vance, Rick. I know that obviously some Republicans are not going to be happy. He calls this a betrayal, though. Rumored course of action in the House is before the text dropped. Combine Ukraine and Israel with other Biden boondoggle Senate to the Senate as a combined package, then let the House vote on a fake border policy package that has no chance. He calls it stupid politics to boot. How many J.D. Vances are there in the Senate?
Well, there's half a dozen. Certainly, I doubt if not too many more than that. This is the essence of this bill, as you pointed out, the Senate bill, which was much, much better for conservatives than this current legislation that the Speaker is putting down, because it had a substantial and maybe historic provision in there for the border. Talk about a missed opportunity historically. But the bottom line is this is going to pass overwhelmingly. The original bill passed by 70% of the Senate. They're going to have just the same kind of numbers for this bill. Of course, Jeannie's right. Everyone's going to look inside, but these are basically going to be the same titles and the same bills that have been presented already. I believe the difference in the overall number, the president's bill being over 100 million, probably relates to some of the humanitarian funds, which I got to believe Republicans at least had to think about before they stripped it out of the bill potentially, because at the end of the day, what's missed in all this discussion of missiles flying over the air and whatnot is the humanitarian crisis that exists on the ground there and other places around the world, which would have benefited from these funds. So I hate being a Republican on the side of ignoring human rights and humanitarian crises around the world, but that seems to be part of what is going on with the Republican caucus in the House these days. So they strip out humanitarian affairs, and they've said no to substantial increases in border security, and so they're basically giving Biden a bill that looks much worse than what they would have gotten from the Senate bill.
Isn't that remarkable? And Ukraine had to wait a long time for it. It is still waiting, Jeannie, and there are questions about whether it is too late. I guess we're going to find out together here. But Mike Johnson could actually, to your point, lose his job over all of this. I know Marjorie Taylor Greene is making a lot of noise. Tom Massey, he's been here before, asked John Boehner. But then there's real question about whether the conference has the stomach for this, and of course whether Democrats will come to Mike Johnson's rescue, and a lot of them say they will. Should he be worried about getting fired this weekend?
I think he has to be concerned about it. We heard him come out yesterday. He, said he is something like a wartime leader, talking about the Civil War and how this is how he feels. So we know he's concerned. But, the reality is a part of what we haven't seen yet, and I'm waiting for that fourth bill to drop, and it may have already, is are there any poison pills in here that move the Democrats out of this? What they say is, a support provided there's nothing there that would send them in the opposite direction. And that's a big concern, because if Mike Johnson is truly, focused on keeping his job and keeping his caucus together, we might see some of that. And that would be another wrinkle in this. So far, I haven't seen anything like that. I haven't even seen that fourth bill yet. But that's something else to watch in the next few minutes, presumably if that fourth bill comes down.
Yeah, we'll keep you posted on that as we, if you're just joining us, work through the legislation here on Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pac Taiwan. TikTok bill appears to be not out yet, Jeannie. Bill 4, we're still waiting for text. We'll let you know when we see that. Rick, I'm supposed to ask you if Mike Johnson's going to get fired this weekend, but we don't know that. Does Mike Johnson even know that?
I don't think Mike Johnson has any idea what's in the minds of Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of her buddies. That's hard to be predictive of that legislator. But I think, you described it right. I mean, he's probably got the backing of the Democratic caucus. Probably not exactly what he wants, but it means he's still speaker. I mean, maybe they call the question on the motion to vacate, but I think the vote is going to be overwhelmingly pro-Johnson. I don't think the Democrats are going to hang him out to dry like they did McCarthy. And so we may be talking about this next week. Maybe it's the last thing on the agenda Sunday night. Stay up late, folks. Get the popcorn ready. We could see some fun in the floor of the House. And yet, all that said, we'd wake up Monday morning and nothing has changed.
Wow. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano in the clutch. Our signature panel, that's why they're here. Bloomberg Politics contributors. When the fourth bill drops, you'll hear about it. And Rick and Jeannie will be back next hour when Kaylee Lyons joins the conversation back in Washington today. And we'll bring in our global television audience for hour 2 here on Balance of Power. Fascinating and horrifying hearing underway today, meantime, on Capitol Hill. A couple of them, actually, tandem hearings looking into the safety record at Boeing. Whistleblower time. This is scary stuff. This is the first of 2 hearings in Washington to explore Boeing's safety record in the wake of the door blowout here, of course. The second panel focusing on claims by a Boeing engineer, the whistleblower I mentioned, who alleges the company's cut corners on not just the 737, the 787, that's the Dreamliner, placing profitability over safety. He says the plane could break apart in flight. Yeah. George Ferguson is back with us, senior analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, been very helpful with the Boeing story since that blowout took place. George, these are the stories that nightmares are made of. What's going to be the impact on the company?
Well, I mean, I think in Congress, Boeing has a lot of folks that are scrutinizing it, aren't happy with it. It's the national aerospace champion, and it hasn't been performing at a good level in the last couple of years, for sure. I don't think, I think that the FAA investigations, the FAA, into the 787 joining, as well as the FAA work with Boeing to stabilize the production process is probably more important than anything that's going to happen today in the hearings. To me, I get the sense this is a bit of a venting. But we'll see. I mean, it is concerning to hear about airplanes potentially breaking apart in flight. What I heard in the initial whistleblower claim was that it was an overtime issue, that they thought that if the joints weren't made correctly, there could be some flex in there, and over time there could be a problem. So I don't get the sense there's a safety of flight issue today. But again, it speaks to some of the challenges at Boeing, that there's a lot of people that are upset about whether or not they were heard when they're telling Boeing management that things weren't going correctly.
Boy, that's for sure. Accusing the company that the aircraft might show premature signs of aging. To your point, George, this is the 787. This is a whole different airframe we're talking about here. Should David Calhoun have come here to Washington to testify? The company is denying, we should note, these allegations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if David Calhoun came to Washington every time there was a whistleblower or a complaint, he'd be more focused on Washington than what he needs to be doing, and focusing on the manufacturing process. So I don't think he necessarily should be there for everyone. I guess it's good that Congress will vet some of these and figure out whether there's any, how much substance is there. But again, I think David Calhoun has other more important things to do, and Boeing has to find a new CEO. That's top of the list. It's not David Calhoun. That's the board, and I think it'd be hard for him to speak to because he's not going to be the CEO long term.
The FAA is out with its own look into this. There are other investigations, George. What should we be watching here as the NTSB and others, including, I think the FBI was looking into this as a criminal matter. When do all these resolve?
Yeah, I mean, these investigations can take some time. The criminal matter I hear is just, it's a matter of due course in a situation like where you lost the Pan and the Alaska jet. But, I guess what we're really focusing on, we do want to hear what they get to the bottom of when they fully explore the 787 joining issue. This is something I think they've addressed previously. And so we're really, trying to figure out if that's something that's already been addressed. And perhaps this whistleblower is talking about historical issues and not.
George Ferguson, Bloomberg Intelligence. Great to have you back, George, and your insights here on this hearing day for Boeing. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stage ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startup, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to build a path towards that. Almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
when I was younger, I used to be in bands. I'd play drums in bands and toured America with them. Did a lot of session drumming, recorded albums. So yeah, it was good fun doing the drumming. The only reason I stopped it, well, I still play, but not as serious as I did when I was younger. But drumming doesn't pay the bills. I was never good enough to be able to pay the bills with it, but it was good fun. I started RJF, and the reason I started it was I saw a gap in the market for particular early stage and startup businesses. With the experience that I've got of running businesses, of being a finance director at the very biggest companies in the world to being finance director of small startups, we were looking at providing more than just basic accountancy services. So yes, we'll do all that. We'll do all the basic, all the statutory side of things that you need to do. But there's so much more value that we can add, and I wanted to have my experience to help these startups, because a lot of them don't really know where to go. You can go to your high street accountants and they can do a good job compliance-wise, but you would question whether they've actually been in the firing line of a business. Have you been in a business where you're thinking, how do I pay wages next week? Or business is really successful, what do we do with it next? Or how do we grow it? How do we grow into international territories? Or how do we grow our markets? How do we expand? So a lot of the experience I've seen over the years and seen different types of business in different sectors, I thought, well, it's a real value that I can add to these businesses as opposed to just being an FD, because a lot of these businesses can't afford an FD. But if we can take care of their statutory side of things, the compliance side of things, I'm on hand to be able to help and advise businesses with their growth strategy, or if they're in difficulty, help them through these times.
Stock market on track for its longest losing streak since January. The Dow down 115, a decline right now of 0.3%. The S&P down 0.7%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index is down 170, a drop of just about 1.1%. A lot of weakness in big tech names. The Nasdaq 100 Index now down by 1.2%. 10 years yielding 4.58% with a